In the darkness of October 24, 1942, on a remote island in the South Pacific, one Marine sergeant faced an impossible situation. Outnumbered, outgunned, and surrounded by enemy forces, he made a choice that would change the course of battle and define heroism for generations to come. This is the story of John Basilone, the Marine who stood alone against an entire Japanese platoon and lived to tell the tale. His actions on Guadalcanal would earn him the Medal of Honor and cement his place in military history as one of America's greatest warriors. Born in Buffalo, New York in 1916, John Basilone grew up in Raritan, New Jersey, the sixth of 10 children in an Italian-American family. His father was a tailor, and young John worked odd jobs to help support the family during the Great Depression. Standing at 5 feet 8 inches with a stocky, powerful build, Basilone was known for his strength and determination. He was a boxer in his youth, developing the physical toughness and mental resilience that would later save his life. In 1934, at just 18 years old, Basilone enlisted in the United States Army, seeking adventure and steady pay. He served 3 years in the Philippines with the 31st Infantry Regiment, where he received his first taste of military life and learned to handle weapons with precision. The tropical climate, the discipline, and the camaraderie shaped him into a soldier. After completing his service, he returned to civilian life, working as a truck driver. But the military had gotten into his blood. In July 1940, with war clouds gathering over Europe and Asia, John Basilone made a decision that would change his destiny. He joined the United States Marine Corps. Boot camp transformed Basilone from a soldier into a Marine. The Corps demanded more discipline, more endurance, more precision. He excelled at weapons training, particularly with the Browning M1917 machine gun, a water-cooled, belt-fed weapon that could deliver devastating firepower. The M1917 was heavy, weighing over 100 pounds with its tripod, and required a crew of at least 2 men to operate effectively. But Basilone mastered it completely, learning not just how to fire it, but how to maintain it under pressure, clear jams instantly, and maximize its deadly potential. After training, Basilone was assigned to Company C, 1st Battalion, 7th Marine Regiment, 1st Marine Division. He was promoted to sergeant and placed in charge of a machine gun section, 2 guns and their crews. His men respected him immediately. He led by example, never asking them to do anything he wouldn't do himself. He was tough but fair, and when things got difficult, he was always the first to step forward. As 1942 progressed and America fully entered World War II after Pearl Harbor, Basilone and his battalion received orders that would test them beyond imagination. They were going to the South Pacific, to a jungle island that most Americans had never heard of. Its name was Guadalcanal. Guadalcanal was hell on earth. Located in the Solomon Islands, this jungle-covered island had become strategically vital in the Pacific War. The Japanese were building an airfield there which would give them the ability to threaten Allied supply routes and launch attacks on Australia. In August 1942, US Marines landed on Guadalcanal in America's first major offensive, Operation against Japan. The initial landing met little resistance, but that wouldn't last. The Japanese were determined to retake the island at any cost, and they began funneling thousands of troops to Guadalcanal for a massive counterattack. The Marines secured Henderson Field, the strategic airstrip, but holding it was another matter entirely. The jungle was oppressive. Temperatures soared above 100 degrees with crushing humidity. Malaria-carrying mosquitoes swarmed constantly. Dysentery and tropical diseases ravaged the Marines. Food was scarce, often reduced to captured Japanese rice. Clean water was nearly impossible to find. The jungle itself seemed alive with danger, insects, snakes, and the constant threat of Japanese infiltrators. Sleep was a luxury measured in minutes, not hours. And through it all, the Marines knew that a massive Japanese counteroffensive was coming. By late October 1942, intelligence reports confirmed Japanese troop buildups. The enemy was landing thousands of soldiers on the island under cover of darkness, preparing for an all-out assault to retake Henderson Field. The Marines dug in, establishing defensive perimeters around the airfield. Sergeant Basilone's machine gun section was assigned to a critical position on a ridge south of the airfield, a likely avenue of Japanese attack. His section had 2 Browning M1917 machine guns, with interlocking fields of fire, creating a deadly zone that any attacking force would have to cross. Basilone prepared his position with meticulous care. He had his crews dig the gun emplacements properly, ensuring good drainage and clear fields of fire. He stockpiled ammunition belts, stacking metal cans, filled with .30 caliber rounds within easy reach. He positioned extra barrels for the machine guns, knowing the weapons would overheat during sustained fire. He checked and rechecked the water cooling systems. Every detail mattered. His men sensed his intensity and followed his example. They didn't know it yet, but Basilone's obsessive preparation would be the only thing standing between them and annihilation. On the night of October 24th, 1942, as darkness fell over Guadalcanal, an eerie quiet settled over the Marine positions. The jungle sounds, insects, birds, the rustle of vegetation seemed muted, as if nature itself was holding its breath. Basilone's instincts screamed danger. He ordered his men to full alert, despite their exhaustion. At approximately 9 p.m., the first artillery shells began falling on Henderson Field. Japanese naval guns from ships offshore pounded the Marine positions in a furious bombardment. This was the prelude, the softening up before the main assault. The ground shook with each impact, and the night sky lit up with explosions. Then came the ground attack. Through the smoke and chaos, Basilone heard what every defender dreads, the sound of hundreds of enemy soldiers moving through the jungle toward his position. The Japanese were launching a major offensive with entire battalions committed to breaking through the Marine lines. Their objective was Henderson Field, and Basilone's machine gun position stood directly in their path. The Japanese forces included elite units, veteran soldiers who had conquered much of Asia and the Pacific. They came forward in waves, screaming battle cries, believing their superior numbers would overwhelm the Americans. They had no idea what they were about to encounter. The first wave hit Basilone's position with terrifying intensity. Japanese soldiers emerged from the jungle in force, rushing toward the Marine lines. Basilone opened fire with his machine gun, the weapon bucking against its tripod as it sent .30 caliber rounds downrange at over 400 rounds per minute. Tracers lit up the darkness, and the distinctive sound of the M1917, a rapid, thumping roar, echoed across the battlefield. Enemy soldiers fell, but more kept coming. The second machine gun in Basilone's section joined the fight, creating a crossfire that caught the attackers in a lethal zone. The battle quickly became desperate. The Japanese kept pressing forward, accepting horrific casualties to reach the Marine positions. Basilone's guns poured fire into the enemy ranks, but the weapons began to overheat from the sustained firing. The water in the cooling jackets boiled, sending steam hissing into the night air. Basilone ordered barrel changes, his crew working frantically to swap out the overheated barrels for cooler ones. Ammunition consumption was staggering. Each gun was burning through belts at an incredible rate. Within the first 30 minutes of combat, Basilone's section had expended thousands of rounds, and the Japanese were still coming. Then disaster struck. A Japanese grenade exploded near one of Basilone's gun positions, killing one crew member instantly and wounding 2 others. The second machine gun fell silent. At almost the same moment, Basilone's own gun jammed, a malfunction at the worst possible time. Japanese soldiers, sensing weakness, surged forward with renewed intensity. The situation was collapsing. Other nearby Marine positions were being overrun. Basilone could hear the sounds of close-quarters combat, rifle fire, grenades, desperate shouts. The defensive line was breaking. But Basilone didn't panic. With bullets cracking past his head and enemy soldiers advancing within meters, he calmly cleared the jam on his gun. His hands moved with practiced precision, removing the jammed belt, clearing the feed mechanism, and reloading. The entire process took less than 30 seconds that felt like an eternity. The gun roared back to life, cutting down the Japanese soldiers who had gotten dangerously close. Basilone then made a decision that defied all logic and military doctrine. He left his position and ran through enemy fire to the damaged second gun. While under continuous fire, he repaired the weapon, trained a surviving crew member to operate it, and got it back into action. 2 guns were now firing again, but the ammunition situation was becoming critical. As the battle raged on, Basilone realized they were running out of ammunition. The belts of .30 caliber rounds were disappearing at an alarming rate, and without resupply, the guns would fall silent within minutes. The nearest ammunition dump was hundreds of yards away, through jungle terrain that was now crawling with Japanese soldiers. Other Marines were either dead, wounded, or pinned down in their own desperate fights. The situation was clear. If someone didn't get more ammunition, the position would be overrun, and the Japanese would break through to Henderson Field. Basilone made his choice. He would go alone. Stripping off his shirt to move more quietly and reduce his heat signature, Basilone grabbed as many empty ammunition belts as he could carry and headed into the darkness. What he did next would become legendary. He moved through the jungle like a ghost, navigating by memory and instinct in near-total darkness. Japanese soldiers were everywhere. He could hear them calling to each other, regrouping for another assault. He had to avoid enemy patrols, cross open ground, and reach the ammunition dump without being detected or killed. The jungle was a maze of shadows and death, every sound potentially hostile, every movement potentially fatal. Basilone reached the ammunition dump and immediately began loading himself down with as much as he could physically carry. Each ammunition belt weighed several pounds, and he took dozens of them. He draped them over his shoulders, wrapped them around his torso, and carried boxes under his arms. The total weight was crushing, over 100 pounds of ammunition, plus his own weapon. Most men couldn't have walked 50 yards with such a load. Basilone had to move hundreds of yards back through enemy-controlled jungle in the dark and do it fast enough to matter. He also grabbed several spare barrels for the machine guns, knowing they would be needed. The return journey was even more dangerous. Weighted down with ammunition, Basilone couldn't move quickly or quietly. He had to use different routes to avoid Japanese soldiers who had moved into the areas he'd just crossed. Several times he came within meters of enemy troops and had to freeze in place, barely breathing, waiting for them to pass. The weight was excruciating, cutting into his shoulders and back. Sweat poured down his face despite the relative coolness of the night. His muscles screamed in protest, but he kept moving, driven by one thought. His men needed this ammunition to survive. He couldn't let them down. When Basilone burst back into his position, his men could hardly believe it. They'd been fighting with dwindling ammunition, expecting to be overrun at any moment. Basilone dumped the ammunition belts and immediately began feeding them into the guns. The weapons resumed their full rate of fire, and the Japanese assault that had been building momentum suddenly hit a wall of lead again. Basilone moved between the two gun positions, directing fire, clearing jams, and replacing barrels. He was everywhere at once, shooting, reloading, encouraging his men and calculating fields of fire. His leadership was keeping the position alive. But the night was far from over. The Japanese launched another massive assault, even larger than the first. This time they concentrated their forces on Basilone's position specifically, recognizing it as a key strongpoint that had to be eliminated. Hundreds of enemy soldiers advanced in waves, accepting catastrophic casualties to reach the Marine lines. Basilone's guns never stopped firing. When both crew members on the second gun were killed by enemy fire, Basilone ran to that position and manned the weapon himself, operating it single-handedly. He fired until the barrel glowed red-hot, changed it with his bare hands despite the searing pain, and kept firing. His hands blistered and burned, but he didn't stop. At the height of the battle, Japanese soldiers broke through the defensive line next to Basilone's position. Enemy troops were now behind him, threatening to surround and destroy his section. The situation had become desperate beyond description. Basilone was now fighting in multiple directions, maintaining fire to his front while Japanese soldiers attacked from the flanks and rear. He grabbed his pistol and fought off close-quarters attacks while simultaneously trying to keep his machine gun in action. Several Japanese soldiers got within meters of his position before he cut them down. The ground around his guns was littered with enemy dead, but they kept coming. In this moment of maximum crisis, Basilone did something that military historians still discuss today. He recognized that his primary machine gun position was about to be overrun. Rather than retreat or surrender, he ordered the few surviving Marines to fall back to a secondary position, while he provided covering fire. Then, operating the M1917 entirely by himself, a weapon designed for a crew of at least two, he laid down such intense fire that the Japanese advance stalled. He fired entire ammunition belts in continuous bursts, creating a wall of bullets that temporarily stopped hundreds of enemy soldiers. When the gun ran empty, he grabbed a rifle and fought hand-to-hand with Japanese soldiers who had gotten into his position. He killed several in close combat before finally breaking away and joining his men at the fallback position. By 3 a.m., Basilone had been fighting continuously for 6 hours. Most of his original section was dead or wounded. He had made multiple ammunition runs through enemy territory. He had repaired jammed guns under fire more times than he could count. His hands were severely burned from changing overheated barrels. He was wounded in multiple places by shrapnel and bullets, minor wounds he hadn't even noticed until later. He was exhausted beyond description, running on pure adrenaline and willpower. And the Japanese were preparing yet another assault. This one would be the largest yet, a final, desperate attempt to break through the Marine lines before dawn. When that final assault came, Basilone essentially stood alone. He operated both machine guns himself, running between the two positions, firing one until it needed a barrel change or ran out of ammunition, then sprinting to the other gun to continue the fight. He moved with such speed and precision that the Japanese attackers believed they were facing an entire platoon of Marines rather than one man. His fire was so accurate and sustained that entire sections of the Japanese advance were annihilated before they could get close. Enemy officers reportedly ordered their men to avoid the area where the American machine gun devil was fighting, but they had no choice. Bazilone's position controlled the approach to Henderson Field. As the first light of dawn began to illuminate the jungle, the Japanese attacks finally stopped. Enemy forces melted back into the jungle, unwilling to continue the assault in daylight when American aircraft could engage them. As silence fell over the battlefield, the true scope of what had happened became clear. The ground around Bazilone's position was carpeted with enemy dead. Japanese casualties from his section alone numbered over 38 confirmed killed, with many more wounded who had been dragged away by retreating forces. The entire Japanese assault on this section of the line had been stopped, primarily by one Marine sergeant and his machine guns. Bazilone himself was barely standing. His hands were severely burned and blistered from repeatedly changing overheated machine gun barrels with his bare hands. He had multiple shrapnel wounds and bullet grazes across his body. He hadn't eaten or drunk water in nearly 12 hours. He was covered in blood, some his own, most from enemy soldiers he'd killed at close range. His uniform was in tatters. The weapons he'd operated all night were so hot they couldn't be touched. Empty shell casings surrounded his position in piles. Officers who reached his position in the morning couldn't believe what they were seeing. One man had held off an entire platoon of Japanese soldiers, and in doing so had prevented a breakthrough that could have cost the Marines Henderson Field and possibly the entire Guadalcanal campaign. News of Sergeant Bazilone's actions spread rapidly through the Marine Corps and then to the American public. The battle on Guadalcanal continued for months, but that October night had been one of its most critical moments. Bazilone's stand had helped blunt a major Japanese offensive. In May 1943, he was awarded the Medal of Honor, America's highest military decoration for valor. The citation recognized his heroic conduct above and beyond the call of duty, and noted that his actions were instrumental in defeating the Japanese assault. He was one of the first enlisted Marines to receive the Medal of Honor in World War II. After receiving the Medal of Honor, Bazilone was sent back to the United States for a war bond tour. The military wanted to use his story to inspire Americans and boost morale. Bazilone became a celebrity, meeting with politicians, appearing at rallies, and giving speeches across the country. He was offered a commission as an officer and a training position stateside, a comfortable job that would keep him safe for the rest of the war. But Bazilone refused. He was a Marine, and his place was with his fellow Marines in combat. After repeatedly requesting to return to the Pacific, his request was finally granted. In December 1944, he shipped out with the 5th Marine Division, heading toward another island, Iwo Jima. On February 19, 1945, Sergeant John Bazilone landed on Iwo Jima with the first wave of Marines. Once again, he led from the front, guiding his machine gun section through intense enemy fire. He successfully destroyed a Japanese blockhouse, clearing the way for his unit to advance off the beach. But moments later, he was struck by enemy mortar fire and killed instantly. He was 27 years old. For his actions on Iwo Jima, he was posthumously awarded the Navy Cross, making him one of only 3 Marines in history to receive both the Medal of Honor and the Navy Cross. His name became synonymous with Marine Corps valor. John Bazilone's story endures because it represents something fundamental about courage and duty. On that October night in 1942, when he stood alone against overwhelming odds, he could have retreated. He could have saved himself. Instead, he chose to fight for his fellow Marines and his mission. His actions that night saved countless American lives and contributed directly to victory in one of World War II's most important battles. Today, the Marine Corps honors his memory, and his name is taught to every new Marine as an example of the Corps' highest ideals. Buildings, ships, and streets bear his name. His hometown of Raritan, New Jersey, celebrates his legacy annually. But perhaps the greatest tribute to John Basilone is the simplest one. He was a Marine who, when faced with the impossible, did the job anyway. He embodied the Corps' motto, Semper Fidelis, always faithful. On Guadalcanal, in the darkest hours before dawn, one sergeant with a machine gun proved that courage, skill, and determination can overcome any odds. His story reminds us that heroes aren't born, they're forged in moments of crisis, when ordinary people choose to do extraordinary things. That is the legend of John Basilone,